There are crimes we fear, and then there are crimes we cannot stop thinking about. These are not just murders, they are puzzles. Carefully constructed patterns. Messages written in blood, in silence, in precision. Behind them, not monsters, but human beings. Intelligent, strategic, manipulative. People who walked among us, smiled at us, served us food, shook hands, and yet, they killed, again and again. In London, 1888, a phantom carved fear into the heart of the city. 5 women found brutally mutilated, and no one ever caught him. He signed his letters with 3 words that still haunt history: Jack the Ripper. In America, almost a century later, another type of darkness emerged: charming, handsome, brilliant. Ted Bundy didn't just kill, he manipulated entire systems. Judges admired him, women wrote him love letters. The world couldn't believe that evil could look so normal. Investigators started asking a new question: what kind of mind commits these crimes? And why? This is not just a story about murder. It's a story about psychology, investigation, and the terrifying evolution of evil. This is The Shadow of Evil. London, 1888. Thick fog curled through the narrow, gas-lit streets of Whitechapel. The poor, the desperate, the forgotten lived there, women with no voice and no protection. And then, the killings started. Not random, not impulsive, carefully staged, every body positioned, every cut calculated, organs removed with surgical precision. The killer was not just violent, he was sending a message. He wanted to terrify, and to be remembered. Letters arrived at police stations, mocking the investigators, signed with chilling confidence: "Catch me if you can." The police had no fingerprints, no DNA, no criminal database, only fear, confusion, and mounting pressure. And yet, something new was born from this horror: the first attempt at criminal profiling. For the first time in history, detectives tried to build the mind of a killer, not just trace his steps. They asked, what kind of person plans a murder like a ritual? A thinker, not just a killer. But behind the chilling courtroom revelations and the media frenzy, something even more powerful emerged: a turning point in investigative psychology. For the first time, detectives officially acknowledged how small inconsistencies in emotional behavior could become key evidence. Body language under pressure, the tone of a voicemail, the absence of genuine panic. In the Masters case, these psychological cues helped investigators read between the lines, beyond alibis, beyond status, beyond social masks. And that changed everything. Detectives began using behavioral pattern mapping, a method that compared the suspect's emotional responses with factual evidence. Were their reactions proportionate? Did their grief align with timelines? Were their words consistent with their actions? Alan Masters, with his perfectly constructed facade, polished, intelligent, influential, became a case study in emotional incongruence. And it helped criminologists worldwide develop what is now known as murder by intention and behavioral discrepancy analysis. From that moment, homicide investigations were no longer just about fingerprints, blood spatter, or forensics. They became psychological. Investigators began to analyze more than what people did. They analyzed how they emotionally performed their innocence. It wasn't just a crime. It was a performance. And the world was watching. What shook investigators the most was not the brutality of the act, but the composure. The polished language. The carefully curated grief. Alan Masters didn't just hide evidence, he hid intention. And that, for criminologists, became a revolution. Until then, many cases focused heavily on physical clues. But after this investigation, behavioral evidence became equally, and sometimes more, powerful. Detectives, forensic psychologists, and legal experts began to ask, what does authentic grief look like? When does self-control become emotional manipulation? Can silence be evidence? In the Masters case, silence was evidence. So were the missing tears. So were the perfectly scripted interviews, and the void where fear should have existed. That absence of emotional authenticity became a new form of trace evidence, not in labs, but in human behavior. This case shifted the future of criminal profiling. It inspired the use of emotional forensics, a technique that compares emotional expression with situational reality. It launched workshops for detectives, training for judicial teams, and even academic papers on narrative control in high-profile offenders. And suddenly, one chilling realization spread across criminology classrooms, police academies, and psychological profiling units: sometimes, the best liar is not the loudest. It's the one who never seems to be lying at all. Reflective closing for criminology students, with insight and emotionally intelligent impact. In criminology, we don't just chase answers, we chase truth. And truth doesn't always live in fingerprints, or phone records, or DNA. Sometimes, truth lies in what isn't said, in the pause between words, in a smile that arrives too soon, in the script of a perfectly rehearsed grief. The Alan Masters case changed how justice listens. It taught investigators to interpret behavior as evidence, and to understand that silence can scream louder than any confession. It reminded us that criminals don't just hide actions, they hide intentions. And that is where psychology meets investigation. As future criminologists, psychologists, or investigators, your mission is not only to read files, but to read people. Not just what they tell you, but how they tell it. Because in the courtroom, in the interview room, or even in a single sentence, the truth always leaves emotional fingerprints. Thank you for staying with me through this case. If there's something that shook investigators more than the crime itself, it was the emotional silence. The absence of authentic grief. That changed the way criminology understands deception, not just as a lie, but as a performance. In the next episode, we step into a darker place, the minds of the most dangerous serial manipulators, not killers of bodies, but killers of perception. Criminals who didn't just commit crimes, they controlled narratives, shaped opinions, and fooled entire communities. Jack the Ripper, England's first serial mystery. London, 1888. The East End was a labyrinth of fog, narrow alleys, and overcrowded tenements. Life was harsh, and the streets were filled with desperation. Women worked the night, marginalized and invisible. And then he appeared, a shadow moving silently through Whitechapel. 5 canonical victims were found within months. Their throats slashed, bodies mutilated with surgical precision. Some organs removed, every crime scene staged. Letters arrived at police stations, taunting the authorities. "Catch me if you can," they wrote, signed with the chilling name that history would never forget, Jack the Ripper. The police were unprepared. No fingerprints, no DNA, no databases, only intuition, observation, and the emerging idea that understanding the criminal mind might be as important as physical evidence. Detectives began documenting patterns, which streets he favored, what time he struck, how he chose victims. Each detail revealed not just cruelty, but calculation. His killings were methodical, ritualistic. He left a signature, his own psychological fingerprint. For criminologists today, Jack the Ripper is more than a historic murder case. It's the first real study of a serial killer's modus operandi and signature. Profilers learned to separate motive from ritual, to analyze patterns in behavior rather than relying solely on physical clues. Consider the victims, women living on the edge of society, with no protection. This case forced investigators to recognize that marginalized populations are often targeted, and that prevention must consider social context, not just criminal pursuit. Letters, newspaper coverage, and witness reports became a testing ground for early behavioral analysis. Even without modern technology, detectives began asking, what type of mind would plan, execute, and then communicate with such confidence? The Ripper case laid the groundwork for modern investigative psychology, linking crime scenes, behavioral patterns, and personality traits. Today's profilers, FBI units, and forensic psychologists still study this case to understand the connection between signature, planning, and psychological profile. But beyond methodology, it also teaches a human lesson. Evil often hides in plain sight, exploiting chaos, poverty, and invisibility. And understanding the context of victims is as critical as understanding the mind of the killer. As we transition across the Atlantic, we will see how these lessons evolve into new investigative approaches, preparing law enforcement to face killers even more cunning, deceptive, and modern than Jack the Ripper. Perfect. Here's Block 3: Ted Bundy, Charm, Manipulation, and Pure Narcissism, USA, 3 to 4 minutes, ready for narration, packed with tension, criminology insight, and psychological detail. Ted Bundy, Charm, Manipulation, and Pure Narcissism. The United States, 1970s. A young, handsome man walks into college campuses, charming, polite, seemingly ordinary. But beneath that smile lurks a darkness that few could imagine. His name, Ted Bundy. Bundy didn't attack randomly. He studied his victims, observed routines, learned habits. He exploited trust, charisma, and social norms. He wasn't just committing murder, he was performing it, with precision and planning. He carried briefcases, crutches, or fake casts to lure women, creating vulnerability while masking danger. For law enforcement, Bundy was a nightmare. He could escape scrutiny not because he was careless, but because he understood human perception. Judges, juries, even law enforcement officers were initially charmed by him. This case forced a new question: how do you catch someone who manipulates the system itself? Criminologists began analyzing behavioral patterns. His choice of victims, young, attractive women, the geography of his attacks, the timing, the way he concealed evidence. They examined his personality, narcissistic, intelligent, socially skilled, traits that would become foundational in modern profiling of organized serial killers. Bundy's escapes from custody taught law enforcement another lesson: procedural vigilance. Even brilliant forensic work can be undermined if systemic protocols fail. His case emphasized the importance of interagency communication, documentation, and anticipatory strategies, lessons still taught in law enforcement academies today. But the Bundy case also highlighted victimology, understanding who is most at risk, why, and how to protect vulnerable populations. His victims were targeted not randomly, but through a specific profile. Modern criminology increasingly integrates these insights to prevent crime before it happens. Ultimately, Bundy's story is more than sensational headlines. It is a study of manipulation, human psychology, and the evolution of investigative methods. He forced law enforcement to see beyond physical evidence, to read behavior, anticipate deception, and respect the subtle clues that reveal intent. As we continue, we'll explore another killer whose facade of normalcy hid horrors beneath the suburban surface, John Wayne Gacy, the killer clown, and see how these patterns repeat, evolve, and teach us about human evil. What made Bundy particularly dangerous was his ability to mask his intent with social normalcy. He could appear friendly, even helpful, while mentally rehearsing his crimes. Investigators learned to pay attention to inconsistencies, small gestures, fleeting nervous tics, or the way he controlled conversations. These subtle cues became early examples of what modern criminologists call behavioral forensics, the art of reading intentions through observation, not just relying on physical evidence. Every interaction, every lie, every carefully calculated pause in his speech became a breadcrumb, revealing the mind of a predator who understood the human desire to trust. John Wayne Gacy, the killer next door. In the suburbs of Chicago during the 1970s, John Wayne Gacy presented himself as a model citizen. He painted houses, volunteered in the community, and even performed as a clown at children's parties. Behind this mask, however, he was hiding unimaginable horrors. Beneath the friendly facade lay a man who lured young men into his home, imprisoned them, and ultimately murdered them. For investigators, Gacy was both a lesson and a nightmare. Unlike Bundy, who preyed on strangers in public spaces, Gacy created a controlled environment inside his own home. Every murder took place within his domain, allowing him to manipulate the scene, hide bodies, and avoid detection for years. This taught law enforcement the importance of looking beyond appearances. Evil can be hidden behind smiles, volunteer work, and neighborhood charm. Criminologists studying Gacy learned the significance of routine activity analysis. Mapping his home, neighborhood patterns, and social interactions provided crucial insight into how organized serial killers operate in their own communities. The case emphasized that sometimes the threat is closest to home, literally, behind a locked door in the suburban house next door. Gacy also highlighted the intersection of personality and environment. His outward normalcy made him a community figure, but it masked deep-seated pathology. Modern criminal profiling recognizes this pattern. Organized killers can appear socially integrated, intelligent, and trustworthy, which complicates investigations. Importantly, the case underscored the value of witness testimony, community vigilance, and persistence in law enforcement. Friends, neighbors, and acquaintances often notice subtle warning signs, missing young men, unusual behavior, or contradictions in stories. These observations, combined with emerging forensic methods, eventually led to Gacy's capture. For criminologists, Gacy's story reinforces that understanding behavioral patterns, environmental context, and victimology is as vital as traditional evidence. It also reminds us that evil often hides behind a mask of normalcy, and that investigation requires both analytical rigor and psychological insight. As we move forward, we will confront another chilling case, one that forced investigators to grapple with obsession, control, and pathology at the extremes of human behavior. Jeffrey Dahmer, the Milwaukee cannibal. Milwaukee, 1980s–1990s. Behind the unremarkable exterior of his apartment building, Jeffrey Dahmer committed crimes that shocked the world. Milwaukee, 1980s–1990s. Behind the unremarkable exterior of his apartment building, Jeffrey Dahmer committed crimes that shocked the world. Unlike other killers who relied on charm or social facades, Dahmer combined control, obsession, and ritualized behavior to carry out his murders. His victims were often young men, many marginalized and vulnerable, whom he lured under the guise of friendship or employment. Dahmer's killings were methodical and grotesquely meticulous. He dismembered bodies, preserved remains, and even attempted necrophilic control. For investigators, this case presented unprecedented psychological and forensic challenges. How do you understand a mind so detached from empathy, yet so rationally organized? Criminologists and law enforcement learned valuable lessons about behavioral signatures and psychological obsession. Dahmer's rituals, the way he kept trophies, the patterns of disposal, the selection of victims, became a blueprint for understanding organized serial killers who operate within closed, private spaces. These behavioral signatures are now standard in profiling, helping investigators link crimes even when physical evidence is limited. The case also highlighted systemic failures. Multiple opportunities to apprehend Dahmer were missed due to assumptions about victim lifestyles, social biases, and miscommunication between police departments. Criminology today emphasizes that recognizing vulnerability, investigating thoroughly regardless of societal status, and maintaining cross-jurisdictional cooperation can prevent prolonged killing sprees. Additionally, Dahmer's story forced law enforcement to integrate psychological analysis, forensic pathology, and community intelligence. It showed that physical evidence alone is often insufficient. The mind of the offender must also be studied, patterns must be interpreted, and the unseen behavioral clues must be recognized. For students of criminology, Dahmer's case is a grim but invaluable lesson: how obsession can manifest in highly organized, ritualistic crimes, how behavioral forensics can anticipate offender patterns, and how society and law enforcement must remain vigilant. As we move, we will reflect on what all these cases collectively taught criminology, police procedures, and the evolving art of profiling, lessons that continue to save lives today. What made Dahmer's case particularly instructive for criminologists was his combination of control and ritual. Every step, from selecting a victim, gaining trust, to the meticulous dismemberment, reflected an obsessive mind seeking power over life and death. Investigators realized that understanding this level of premeditation requires not only forensic analysis but also psychological insight, mapping patterns, anticipating behavior, and recognizing that what may appear random is often highly structured. This approach became foundational in modern criminal profiling, teaching students and law enforcement that serial offenders often leave invisible behavioral signatures that can connect crimes and predict future actions. Criminological lessons and police evolution. Across decades and continents, from the foggy streets of Whitechapel to the suburbs of Chicago and the apartments of Milwaukee, one truth becomes clear: understanding the mind of a killer is as important as collecting physical evidence. Jack the Ripper, Ted Bundy, John Wayne Gacy, and Jeffrey Dahmer each taught investigators lessons that shaped modern criminology. First, behavioral patterns matter. Every killer leaves a signature, in ritual, victim selection, method of control, or communication. Recognizing these patterns allows detectives to link cases across time and geography, anticipate the offender's next move, and prevent further tragedies. Profilers learn to see beyond the body to the intent behind the act. Second, profiling evolved into a science. Early investigations relied on intuition, guesswork, or witness statements. Today, detectives integrate psychological assessment, geographic mapping, and victimology. Bundy's manipulation, Gacy's suburban facade, and Dahmer's ritualistic methods highlighted the need for detailed behavioral analysis. Criminologists now study not only what happened, but why it happened, and how the offender thinks. Third, vulnerable populations require proactive protection. Many victims were marginalized: sex workers, young runaways, men overlooked by society. Their invisibility delayed detection and allowed killers to operate for years. Modern criminology emphasizes outreach programs, community engagement, and targeted prevention to reduce vulnerability. Fourth, interagency cooperation is critical. Bundy's multiple escapes exposed gaps in communication between jurisdictions. Dahmer's case revealed how disconnected reporting can allow continued victimization. Today, coordinated databases, shared intelligence, and nationwide profiling systems prevent such lapses. Fifth, emotional and behavioral evidence is as important as physical evidence. The Masters case in England demonstrated that investigators could read lies, manipulations, and concealed guilt through subtle behavioral cues, body language, speech patterns, emotional responses. This led to the formal study of emotional forensics, now a key tool in modern criminal investigations. Sixth, training and knowledge transfer are essential. Every notorious killer became a case study. Police academies and criminology programs now teach officers to recognize manipulative behavior, anticipate offender strategies, and apply psychological profiling to active investigations. Lessons from these cases save lives and prevent repeat offenses. Finally, these cases illustrate the human cost of crime and investigation. Beyond statistics, these murders left families devastated, communities fearful, and societies questioning justice systems. Understanding this impact ensures that criminologists and investigators never lose sight of their ultimate mission: to protect, to understand, and to bring closure wherever possible. In short, these killers changed law enforcement forever. They taught us that evil can hide in plain sight, that patterns matter more than appearances, and that understanding the human mind is just as vital as analyzing fingerprints. As we move to the final block, we will reflect on the social impact, ethical lessons, and the enduring legacy of these infamous cases, closing the documentary with a message that resonates with both students of criminology and the public. Social impact, ethics, and lasting lessons. These cases are more than history lessons or sensational headlines. They are mirrors reflecting society's vulnerabilities, law enforcement's evolution, and the enduring struggle to understand human evil. Jack the Ripper terrorized London's marginalized, Bundy exploited trust across state lines, deceit hid in plain sight, and Dahmer weaponized obsession and control. Each story shows that violence often targets the powerless, and that systemic blind spots can allow it to persist. For criminology students, the lesson is clear. Investigation requires both technical skill and psychological insight. Fingerprints, blood, and forensic science are vital, but reading behavior, understanding intent, and analyzing patterns is equally crucial. These killers taught law enforcement that to prevent future crimes, we must understand both the crime and the criminal mind. There is also a moral dimension. Communities, media, and investigators face ethical questions: how to report without glorifying, how to protect the vulnerable, and how to balance justice with empathy. Every case underscores that the cost of ignoring these questions is measured in lives lost. And yet, hope emerges through learning. Profiling techniques, emotional forensics, victimology, and interagency cooperation all grew from these horrors. Today, police are better equipped, societies more aware, and students of criminology armed with knowledge that can save lives. So remember, these stories are not just about murder, they are about society, psychology, and justice. They challenge us to remain vigilant, to question appearances, and to protect the unseen. As we close this episode, reflect on this. Evil may hide behind a smile, a friendly gesture, or the quiet of everyday life. But investigation, observation, and understanding human behavior can bring it into the light. If you want to continue exploring the darkest corners of the human mind, stay tuned for our next episode, Monsters with a Smile, the most deceptive serial killers who look normal. Don't forget to subscribe, leave your thoughts in the comments, and share this documentary with anyone curious about how psychology, investigation, and human behavior intersect in the most extreme cases.